Hi everyone, and welcome to Read Demon with Tori. It's been a while. I think it's been like almost 2 months since I posted a video, mostly because I have been going through a lot of transition, getting a new job, and trying to, leave my old job, and also spending honestly a lot of time watching Star Trek and learning how to use TikTok. So it's been an interesting couple of months. So for my first video back, I have a couple that I want to do, but pick something easy for this time, just another library haul. So I'm going to go through all of my latest, gets from the library. And to start on like a literary note, I'm about halfway through this. A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. George Saunders is one of my favorite short story writers, and I have never been much of a fiction writer, but it's really interesting to hear his take on what makes good stories work, and particularly on revision. So in this book, Saunders goes through, I think, 7 stories by some of the most famous Russian writers like Tolstoy, Gogol, and Chekhov, and a couple others that I can't remember. And kind of there's some exercises on how to use some of the techniques used here. It's interesting because these stories are only available in translation, and I wonder a little bit about how that affects our readings of them. But I've never really read any of the Russians, and I really appreciated having this sort of crash course, both in like what makes good fiction, specifically short stories is the medium he's looking at, and also all these turn of the 20th century stories are really still holding my attention. So it's interesting, and I definitely recommend it if you have any interest in like writing or what makes a good story. Continuing on the literary page, I got a couple books of poetry that I'm excited about. Anodyne, it's the newest book by Khadijah Queen, who is published by Tin House, and that's how I found her, and she's amazing. I can't remember the name of the poetry collection that I read by her most recently. Something about the outfits I had on, but it is really good. And so I'm excited to read this one, which has an amazingly beautiful cover as well. I pretty much will read any of her books at this point, I think. And then this one I'm also already started reading. I'm about halfway through, My Baby First Birthday by Jenny Zhang. And I love her because I read Sour Heart, which was a book of short stories that she published a few years ago that was just like one of my top 5-star reads of that year. So it's been interesting to read her poetry instead. It's definitely different, and this book is like really angry and sad, and empowering and gross. So if you have a low tolerance for gross, this might not be the book for you, but like that's something that you don't always find in poetry. So I've been really interested in reading it. It has like a stream of consciousness feel that's very reminiscent of Tommy Pico, who is one of my favorites and actually also wrote a blurb for this. So if you're into, a little bit of experimental stream of consciousness poetry, and I think especially if you're like a younger person, like millennial and below, you will really identify with Jenny's voice. So those are the 2 books of poetry I have to read. And then I have 3 sort of science fiction fantasy books, which has been definitely my go-to genre as of late. The first is the really new book by Jeff Vandermeer called Hummingbird Salamander. I've actually reviewed a good bit of his stuff. I read his Ambergris trilogy for March of the Mammoths this year, and I've talked a little bit about his Area X series as well, which I really loved, specifically Annihilation. I don't really know anything about this book other than that Jeff Vandermeer wrote it, and I don't always love his execution, but his like worlds and atmosphere are just, and themes are so up my alley that, like, again, I will read anything that he writes. So I'm looking forward to, I'm going on vacation next week, and I am looking forward to reading this one. I'll let you know how it is. And then the next book that I got from the library, I frankly know very little about. It's called The Rain Heron by Robbie Arnott. I don't know. And honestly, I only picked up this book from the library because Jeff Vandermeer, who I was just talking about, not only wrote a blurb on the back of this book, but actually listed it. I think it was like Jeff Vandermeer's list of climate fiction you need to read right now, or something like that. And as somebody who is a climate justice activist, and advocate, I'm really trying to read a lot of fiction that's sort of in that vein, and that's, I think, why I love Jeff Vandermeer so much. There's not that many people who write fiction that's like really explicitly environmental. There are more and more now as that reality becomes closer and more unavoidable in our culture. But I'm really looking in my sci-fi and fantasy for something that's explicitly addressing environmentalism or environmental issues, and so I'm excited to read this despite not really knowing anything about it, except for that it takes place in a sort of, post-apocalyptic future somewhat, and that there's an interesting creature in it, the rain heron. Laura Vandenberg also wrote a blurb on the back of this book, and she is another one of the short story writers and novelists that I've really liked over the past couple years. I think my last library haul had I Hold a Wolf by the Ears, which I really enjoyed. I'll put the link in the description to my Goodreads review of that book of short stories, which is, again, very atmospheric, a little creepy. So I'm assuming that this book will have some of that same vibe. And then the last book is one of my most anticipated of 2021. It's A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martine. And this is the second book in, I don't know if it's a trilogy, a series. The first one was called A Memory Called Empire. And I actually got it for my brother for his birthday. And it's one of, I guess, the books that I would suggest to folks who are interested in feminist sci-fi and fantasy specifically. It is got a lot of history, the series does, historical influence. There's some Byzantinism going on. Obviously this takes place in a different world. But I can see a lot of linguistics and history, nerdery. I can tell that Arkady Martine is probably something of an academic. And among people who wrote blurbs for this include Martha Wells, who wrote the Murderbot Diaries, if you're into that, and Charlie Jane Anders, who is on my list. I've never read any of her stuff, but it seems like a natural fit. So this is, again, the second book of that series. The first one's called A Memory Called Empire, and I would say definitely you should read it. If you like, history or sci-fi fantasy worlds, inspired by academic pursuit, linguistics, that kind of stuff. A Memory Called Empire also won the Hugo Award, I want to say 2019, but I'm not exactly sure. I also really just like this cover. There's always really good high stakes, I feel demonstrated in her covers. So I really enjoyed the first book. I'm really excited to read the second one. Now I need to go look up if it's a trilogy or how many books there are slated to be. But I would really recommend this to folks who like feminist and historical based or inspired sci-fi and fantasy. And I actually probably will go a little bit more in depth with A Memory Called Empire when I do one of my upcoming videos. Is going to be just what are my most recommended feminist sci-fi and fantasy books. So you should read A Memory Called Empire so that you can read the new book, A Desolation Called Peace. And I will just say again, all these books came from the Multnomah County Library. It's been so great to be able to like read a lot of, you know, anticipated books that are just coming out through the library. Some of them, like when A Memory Called Empire, like that whole series comes out, I'll probably buy. But in the meantime, like to avoid having different editions of each one, it's really nice to be able to read it from the library. So yeah, this isn't even all of the library books I have right now. I also have a couple of audiobooks that I'm reading, that I, you know, talk to you about at a different time. But thank you to the library in Multnomah County, and bless you for existing, especially during quarantine. So I will come back soon and give you some recommendations specifically for feminist sci-fi and fantasy. And for now, I hope your summer's off to a great start. Thanks for watching.